Tonight, you step into a world of smoke-black rafters, frozen roads, and candlelit halls, where the first winter cloaks were not made for beauty, but for survival. Long before silk and velvet ruled the courts of kings, early civilizations wrapped themselves in the skins of hunted animals to survive bitter cold, endless rain, and dark medieval winters. But somehow, over centuries of mud, firelight, and hard living, those rough hides slowly became symbols of wealth, elegance, and fashion. So settle in tonight as we wander through snowy forests, crowded markets, smoky tanneries, and noble feast halls to discover how humanity quietly turned animal skins into status, comfort, and style. And before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy these slow medieval journeys through history. Now dim the lights, get comfortable, and let the fire crackle softly as we begin. Hey guys, tonight you find yourself standing beneath the dripping arch of a medieval town gate while sleet taps softly against your hood and runs down the back of your neck in freezing little rivers. The guards above you huddle beneath damp wool cloaks, pretending not to shiver, while a tired mule nearby exhales steam into the winter dusk like a tiny dragon that has entirely given up on greatness. Beneath your boots, the road is thick with mud, straw, horse dung, and the sort of mystery puddles medieval travel brochures really oversold as quaint rustic charm. A bell sounds somewhere beyond the walls, slow, heavy. Monastery bells marking the evening hour while smoke curls from dozens of crooked chimneys into a sky the colour of wet ashes. You smell peat smoke, boiled onions, wet fur, and river mist drifting low along the ditch outside the walls. Honestly, you probably would not last a week out here before begging for central heating and a bath that does not involve suspiciously cold water hauled in a bucket by someone named Osric. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in tonight, feel free to comment your location and local time. Somewhere out there, another sleepless traveller may be listening beneath their own quiet little patch of darkness. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The gate groans open just enough for you to slip inside with a cluster of late travellers. A cartwheel squeals nearby like a dying goose, and one of the guards mutters a prayer to St. Eligius, patron of metal workers and horses, though no one can quite agree whether the saint truly protects carts or merely watches them fail with holy disappointment. Inside the walls, the town presses close around you. Timber houses lean toward one another overhead as if conspiring in whispers. Candlelight glows faintly through shutter cracks. Water drips from eaves into narrow gutters that run dark beside the street. Somewhere ahead, a dog barks once, then decides the weather is too miserable for further commitment. You pull your cloak tighter and follow the smell of smoke and tannin toward the lower quarter near the river. That is where the leather workers gather. Even before you reach them, you know you are close. The scent announces itself with astonishing confidence. Tanneries, you discover, are medieval society's way of proving that humanity will endure almost anything for decent shoes. The smell rolls through the alleys in warm, sour waves: wet hide, wood ash, urine vats, lime pits, smoke, damp bark, and animal fat. It settles into your clothes instantly, as though the town itself has chosen you personally for this burden. Near the riverbank, rows of stretched hides hang beneath awnings like pale, ghostly sails shifting in the wind. Men with thick arms scrape skins across curved wooden beams, while apprentices carry buckets that slosh unpleasantly in the dark. One boy, no older than 12, nearly collides with you while balancing a stack of rabbit pelts. "Watch the fox fur," he snaps with the exhausted dignity of someone who has worked since dawn. You apologize, though honestly the fox fur seems to be managing the encounter quite well on its own. The tannery yard glimmers with puddles reflecting torchlight. Oak fats stand half buried in mud, steaming faintly in the cold. A few geese wander fearlessly between the workers, pecking at scraps nobody else wants. Medieval geese, you quickly realize, possess the confidence of minor nobility. You pause beneath an awning where an older tanner works carefully at a stretched deerskin. His beard is silver with rainwater, and his leather apron shines dark with years of oil and smoke. Beside him hangs a fur-lined cloak so finely stitched that it clearly belongs to someone wealthy enough to avoid standing in weather like this. The old man notices your stare. "Noble woman's winter mantle," he says. "River merchant's wife. Wants squirrel lining sewn inside." He rubs the hide thoughtfully between rough fingers. Soft as prayer smoke now, was stiff as a barn door 3 weeks ago. You watch him work the skin with slow, practiced movements. Scrape, pull, rub oil deep into the surface. The process feels ancient, almost ceremonial. Somewhere behind the tannery another bell rings, softer this time, perhaps from a roadside shrine or a chapel hidden deeper within the town. Animal skins are everywhere here, hanging from racks, wrapped around shoulders, stitched into gloves, fastened into boots, spread across benches beside hearths. They warm babies, line beds, cover saddles, patch roofs, and bind books. Even now, in the fading light, townsfolk pass wearing fur collars crusted with sleet, leather belts darkened by rain, wool cloaks pinned with scraps of fox or lamb. No one thinks much of it. That may be the strangest thing. To these people, skins are not fashion in the modern sense. They are survival first, warmth second, status third. Vanity arrives somewhere much later, usually after frostbite has been avoided. Still, vanity does arrive. Across the lane, 2 merchant daughters hurry past beneath shared hooded cloaks trimmed in pale rabbit fur. One glances toward a polished bronze mirror hanging outside a trader's stall. Even in this bitter weather, people remain people. A drunk man stumbles nearby holding one boot in his hand. "Leather splits in the cold," he announces solemnly to absolutely no one. Then he steps directly into a puddle with his bare foot and immediately regrets every decision that led him here. You continue deeper through the tannery quarter while rain ticks softly against stretched hides overhead. A narrow workshop glows warmly ahead, its shutters open despite the smell. Inside, candlelight flickers across rows of cured pelts hanging from rafters blackened with soot. A woman sits near the hearth sewing fur lining into a child's winter cap. Her needle flashes silver in the firelight. Beside her, an elderly grandmother sorts scraps of leather into careful piles, while muttering old folk sayings under her breath. Fox for cleverness, hare for luck, lamb for gentle sleep. Some swear certain animals leave traces of themselves behind in the skins they once wore. Fox fur supposedly sharpens the mind. Wolf pelts keep away fever spirits. Rabbit feet tucked into boots are said to prevent blisters during pilgrimages. Even now, it is hard to tell whether anyone fully believes such things or simply finds comfort in repeating them during long winters. The grandmother notices you listening. "Never trust goat hide in spring," she warns suddenly. You wait for explanation. None comes. That, too, feels deeply medieval. Outside, night settles fully over the town. Torches hiss in the damp wind atop the walls. Somewhere a horse stamps inside a stable. Somewhere else, Monks begin evening prayers while the cold river slides black beneath the bridge beyond the tannery yards. You stand beneath dripping eaves watching smoke drift upward through the darkness, and slowly the truth of this world begins settling around you like another heavy cloak. Long before silk roots and velvet courts, before jewelled fashions and embroidered sleeves, humanity learned something simpler. A cold night can kill you. And the first answer to that cold hangs drying beside the river. Morning arrives reluctantly, like an old monk dragged from bed before dawn prayers. A grey mist clings low over the river outside the tannery quarter, and the frost along the wooden fences glimmers faintly beneath the first pale wash of daylight. Somewhere nearby, a rooster attempts optimism and is answered immediately by a coughing fit from an unseen stable boy. You wake on a straw pallet in the loft above the workshop, wrapped beneath 2 heavy wool blankets that smell faintly of smoke, lanolin, and wet dog. During the night the wind rattled the shutters so fiercely you half expected the whole building to drift into the river. Yet somehow the old timbers held. Medieval architecture often survives through a powerful combination of stubbornness and prayer. But lo, you hear voices already moving through the workshop. The grandmother from last night is awake before sunrise, feeding thin sticks into the hearth while muttering about damp weather and lazy saints. The woman with the needle hums softly as she folds finished caps beside the fire. You descend the narrow ladder carefully, ducking beneath strings of hanging rabbit pelts that brush your cheeks with icy softness. Breakfast waits near the embers. Coarse bread, onion pottage, and weak ale served warm because the water cannot entirely be trusted. No one here drinks cold water willingly unless they enjoy fever, regret, or both together. The grandmother hands you a crust without ceremony. You'll want food before the hunters return. Outside, the town still yawns awake beneath layers of frost and smoke. Bells echo faintly through the mist while apprentices shovel slush from doorways into the gutter. You follow the old woman through winding lanes toward the northern gate, where villagers gather beside carts and pack mules. A smell of pine sap rides the air now. Forest smell, wet bark, moss, cold earth beneath leaves. Hunters are coming in from the woods. The gate creaks open just after dawn, and the first figures emerge from the trees like shadows peeling themselves free from the fog. 3 hunters trudge toward town carrying bundled skins over their shoulders. Their boots are caked with frozen mud. Fur caps sit low over reddened ears. One man drags a sled loaded with deer hide beneath a layer of stiffening frost. You notice immediately that nothing is wasted. Not the antlers tied carefully along the sled edge, not the sinew cords drying beside the hides, not even the hooves bundled in a sack for glue boiling later. Medieval people possess a talent for looking at an animal and seeing 12 future household objects. The lead hunter pauses near the gate to warm his hands over a brazier. His beard is rimmed white with frozen breath. Hard trail today, he mutters, lost 1 hound near the marsh. The others nod grimly. No one asks further questions. Forests are dangerous places in winter, and people here speak of them with the same cautious respect sailors reserve for rough seas. Some swear spirits wander old forests after snowfall. Others claim saints themselves walk there disguised as beggars to test travellers. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether the true danger comes from wolves, robbers, hunger, or simply becoming lost among endless trees while daylight fades too quickly. The sled is pulled toward the tannery quarter while townsfolk glance over the incoming hides with practical interest. A butcher examines one deerskin approvingly. A cobbler asks about wolf pelts. A merchant woman fingers a strip of fox fur while calculating exactly how much vanity she can afford before winter taxes arrive. You walk beside the hunters through narrow lanes slick with half-frozen mud, Smoke rises from chimneys in twisting blue ribbons. Somewhere overhead, laundry hangs stiff as wooden boards between buildings. A dog begins following you quietly, thin and brown with one torn ear and the deeply suspicious expression common to medieval dogs. No one seems to own him. Equally, no one seems capable of getting rid of him. At the tannery yard, work begins immediately. Fresh skins are unloaded onto wooden tables beneath open sheds. Steam rises where frost melts from the hides. One apprentice carries buckets of salt while another sharpens scraping blades against stone. The sounds blend together softly, metal rasping, low voices, dripping water, distant bells. You stand close enough now to see the first stage properly. The hides still remember the animals they once covered. Deerskin speckled faintly along the back, fox fur rich and red beneath the morning light, thick winter sheep wool clotted slightly with burrs and forest debris. One hide bears an arrow tear carefully stitched shut to preserve its value. A younger hunter notices your expression. "Strange work if you think on it too long," he says. Then he shrugs. But cold cares little for strange thoughts. That sentence settles heavily in the morning air. A tanner begins spreading coarse salt across a fresh hide, rubbing it deep into the flesh side with practiced hands. Salt draws out moisture before rot can claim the skin. Another worker hangs rabbit pelts above a low smoky fire where they will dry slowly through the day. The smells are sharp but oddly alive. Pine smoke, wet leather, damp wool, animal musk, bark tannin soaking in oak vats nearby. You begin to understand why entire neighbourhoods form around this trade. The work consumes space, water, smoke, labour, and patience in enormous amounts. A monk passes briefly through the yard carrying parchment bundles beneath his cloak. Even monasteries depend on skin work. Books, gloves, shoes, belts, satchels, saddle straps. Civilization itself seems stitched together with leather thongs and fur lining. The brown dog beside you suddenly steals a strip of smoked eel from a worker's basket and bolts triumphantly across the mud. 3 grown men give chase. The dog escapes easily. Honestly, he may be the cleverest resident in town. Near midday, snow begins drifting lightly from the grey sky. The flakes settle silently atop the stretched hides and along the edges of wooden vats. Workers continue regardless. Medieval labour pauses for very few reasons, and slightly miserable weather ranks low on the list. The old grandmother from the workshop joins you carrying a basket of herbs. For the soaking pits, she explains. You peer inside, juniper, sage, crushed bark, a few bitter roots you cannot identify. Does it help? Sometimes this answer appears entirely sufficient for her. Folk remedies mix freely with practical craft here. Some tanners whisper charms before starting valuable pelts. Others nail dried herbs above workshop doors to ward away rot spirits. One apprentice quietly spits over his shoulder before touching wolf hide, convinced bad luck clings to predators even after death. Even now, it is hard to tell where skilled knowledge ends and superstition begins. Perhaps the people themselves no longer separate the two. By afternoon the snow thickens, softening the town into muted whites and drifting silence. Through the falling flakes you watch villagers crossing the square wrapped in patched leather cloaks and fur-lined mittens. Every garment tells a story of a labour somewhere upstream from this moment. A hunter kneeling in frozen leaves, a woman scraping hide beside smoke, a child stitching worn gloves by candlelight, a merchant bargaining beneath rain-soaked awnings. Nothing appears quickly here. Warmth itself must be worked for by hand. The bells ring again as daylight fades, and you find yourself standing beside the river watching fresh hides sway gently in the wind above dark water. Snow gathers softly along their edges like white stitching. Long ago, someone first looked at the skin of a hunted animal and understood it could become another layer of human survival. Not elegant yet, not fashionable, just necessary. But necessity, given enough winters, slowly learns to become beauty. Snow continues through the night in soft, endless silence, muffling the town beneath white roofs and icy thatch. By dawn, the tannery quarter looks almost peaceful, which feels deeply unfair considering the smells waiting underneath it all. You wake again to monastery bells rolling slowly across the frozen river. The sound drifts through the shutters like thick smoke, low and steady enough to make the entire morning feel half asleep. Beside the hearth downstairs, the grandmother already tends a black iron pot while muttering complaints about frozen joints and apprentices who scrape hides like drunken sheep. The brown dog with the torn ear has somehow entered the workshop during the night. No one invited him. No one removes him. He sleeps beside the fire with the complete confidence of a tax collector. You warm stiff hands near the embers while the woman prepares breakfast pottage thickened with barley. Outside, faint voices echo through the snowy lanes as workers begin another day. A cart rattles somewhere beyond the shutters. Hooves clop softly through slush. A distant child laughs, followed almost immediately by someone yelling about spilled onions. Life continues, even in weather that seems personally offended by humanity. Today the old tanner invites you deeper into the work itself. "You've watched enough," he says, fastening his leather apron. "Come smell how civilization survives winter." This turns out to be less poetic than it sounds. The tannery yard steams faintly beneath the cold sky. Smoke rises from low fires under drying sheds while snow melts into muddy tracks between the vats. Rows of hides sway overhead like pale banners. Some are fresh and stiff. Others already soften into supple leather beneath careful treatment. You follow the tanner toward a line of pits dug into the earth beside the riverbank. Oak planks cover several of them loosely. The smell grows sharper with every step. One apprentice lifts a lid. You immediately regret possessing a nose. The old tanner chuckles. "Ah," he says proudly, "the true perfume of honest work." Inside the pit, cloudy liquid sloshes around partially soaked hides. Lime, ash, stale urine, water. Bark extracts every unpleasant substance medieval ingenuity can gather seems to have assembled here in determined cooperation. Tanning, you learn, is less one single craft and more a long argument against decay. Fresh hides rot quickly if neglected. First they must be cleaned, salted, soaked, scraped free of flesh and hair, softened, smoked, oiled, rubbed with tannins drawn from bark or roots. Every stage takes days or weeks. Every mistake ruins valuable material. No wonder tanners guard their methods like monks protecting relics. The old man hands you a scraping blade curved like a crescent moon. Careful with the pressure. You stand beside a stretched sheepskin draped over a wooden beam polished smooth by years of use. The surface beneath your hands feels cold, heavy, strangely alive despite its stillness. You scrape cautiously. Wet hair peels away in clumps. The tanner nods approvingly. Better than most merchants. That may be the closest thing to praise available in this quarter. Around you, workers move steadily through the morning rhythm. One man stirs bark mixture into a steaming vat using a paddle longer than a spear. Another stretches rabbit pelts tight against wooden frames. Apprentices carry buckets, stack firewood, sharpen knives, and occasionally slip spectacularly in the mud. A boy skids directly into a water trough nearby. Nobody rushes to help. The medieval workforce, you discover, believes embarrassment builds character. Snowflakes drift lazily through gaps in the awnings while smoke curls around the rafters overhead, somewhere close by. A woman sings softly while stitching leather gloves near a doorway. Her tune blends with the scrape of blades and the distant river current sliding beneath thin sheets of ice. The tanner explains how bark matters enormously. Oak bark gives strength, willow softens finer skins, birch lends pale colour. Some craftsmen add herbs or animal fat mixtures known only within certain families. No one can quite agree whether the best leather comes from skill, secret ingredients, or simply patience blessed by good weather. Too much damp ruins everything, the old man says. He gestures toward the cloudy sky with visible suspicion, as though winter itself personally conspires against his livelihood. Inside one covered shed, strips of cured leather hang beside finished goods awaiting market belts, gloves, water skins, boot tops, knife sheaths. You run your fingers gently across a pair of riding gloves lined in rabbit fur. The inside feels astonishingly soft after the harshness of the workyard outside. Transformation surrounds you everywhere here. Rawhide becomes useful object through labour so gradual it almost escapes notice. A young apprentice named Martin shows you how smoked leather gains resistance against rain. He cannot be more than 14, though his hands already look 40 from cold water and scraping lime. My father says smoke keeps bad spirits out too, he tells you while adjusting hides above a low fire. Do you believe him? Martin shrugs. Can't hurt. This philosophy appears to govern roughly half of medieval daily life. By midday the snow finally stops. Weak sunlight breaks through clouds, turning the river silver beyond the tannery yard. Workers gather briefly near the fire to eat coarse bread and smoked fish from shared trenches. Ale passes between rough hands. Steam rises from damp cloaks drying near the flames. The brown dog reappears carrying someone's glove. A chase begins immediately. Again, he escapes without consequence. The old grandmother joins the meal carrying bundles of dried herbs tied with red thread. She tosses several into one of the soaking pits while murmuring words too quiet to fully hear. For luck, you ask. For rot, she answers. Then, after a pause, maybe both. Some swear leather spoils less quickly if charms are spoken during the waxing moon. Others insist fox fur sewn on a child's sleeve prevents nightmares during harsh winters. One worker refuses to cut leather on saints' feast days after claiming his brother once sliced clean through his hand during Candlemas. Even now, standing among smoke and snow beside the river, it becomes difficult to separate practical knowledge from inherited fear. Perhaps survival itself creates superstition. When so much depends on weather, animals, illness, and chance, people cling tightly to rituals that make uncertainty feel manageable. By late afternoon, you help carry finished leather bundles toward a nearby storehouse. Inside, the air smells richly of oak bark, wax, and smoke. Shelves hold rolled hides stacked carefully beside sacks of salt and folded fur cloaks awaiting wealthy buyers. You notice immediately how expensive softness becomes. Fine squirrel fur, beaver pelts, smooth calfskin dyed rich brown or red. Such items rarely belong to ordinary villagers. Most common folk wear patched leather until it cracks beyond repair. But nobles, merchants, abbots, wealthy widows, they desire refinement. Supple gloves, fur-trimmed sleeves, riding boots polished with the oils until candlelight gleams across them. Fashion grows slowly here, almost secretly, emerging first from necessity before drifting toward beauty. Outside, evening settles again over the town, Bells echo through cold air while smoke thickens above rooftops. Snowmelt drips steadily from eaves into frozen gutters below. You pause beside the river one last time before night fully arrives. Above you, cured hides sway gently from their frames in the fading light, no longer looking entirely like animal remains. Not yet clothing, not yet luxury, but something in between. A strange halfway state where human hands slowly persuade nature to become civilization. The cold deepens during the night until even the river seems to move more slowly beneath its skin of ice. Wind rattles the shutters above your straw pallet, and somewhere downstairs the brown dog barks once in his sleep, perhaps dreaming of stolen gloves and glorious escape. When morning comes, the sky hangs low and white over the town. Frost feathers the inside edges of the window frame. Your breath drifts faintly in the air above the blankets. For several long moments you consider remaining exactly where you are forever. Unfortunately, medieval life contains very little respect for personal comfort. The monastery bells begin before sunrise. One deep note rolls across the frozen streets, followed by another and another, until the whole town seems to wake reluctantly beneath their summons. The old grandmother downstairs mutters something deeply uncharitable about monks who ring bells warm indoors while honest people freeze. Still, by the time you descend into the workshop, she has already wrapped herself in 2 shawls and prepared to visit the Abbey Hill beyond the market quarter. The brothers need parchment straps and repaired bindings, she explains, and they pay in decent ale. A compelling argument. You follow her through streets glazed with thin ice while dawn slowly brightens the eastern sky. Shopkeepers sweep snow from thresholds. Stable boys scatter straw over slippery stones. Smoke rises blue and steady from bakery chimneys, carrying the warm smell of coarse bread through the bitter air. The town changes as you climb away from the tannery quarter. The sharp stink of curing hides fades behind you, replaced by incense drifting faintly from chapel doors and the cleaner scent of pine smoke from wealthier homes. A pair of novice monks hurry past with lowered heads, sandals wrapped in cloth against the cold. One nearly slips on the icy stones and catches himself against a wall with impressive panic. His companion whispers, "Saints preserve us." You suspect the saints are busy elsewhere. The abbey appears gradually through the morning mist, rising above the town on a slope of frozen earth and bare winter trees. Thick stone walls surround it. Narrow windows glow gold with candlelight. A bell tower rises overhead, dark against the pale sky like a watchful finger pointing toward heaven. You pass through the gatehouse into a courtyard dusted with snow. The world immediately quiets. Monasteries possess a strange stillness, unlike anywhere else in the medieval world. Even when busy, they feel wrapped in layers of silence built from prayer, stone, routine, and centuries of whispered devotion. A young monk greets the grandmother warmly and leads you through cloisters where your footsteps echo softly beneath vaulted arches. Beeswax candles flicker beside painted saints whose solemn expressions suggest they have seen entirely too much human foolishness. Inside the guesthouse hall, warmth gathers heavily around a central hearth. Travellers sit quietly beneath wool blankets sipping weak ale. A merchant sleeps upright against the wall with his hat over his face. Nearby, an old pilgrim warms swollen feet near the fire while muttering prayers to St. Roch against illness. No one moves quickly here. The monastery measures time differently. Bells divide the hours, prayer marks the day, candle wax drips slowly, ink dries patiently. Even the smoke rising toward the rafters seems unhurried. The grandmother disappears toward the storage rooms with her bundles while you remain near the hearth, thawing your hands beside a monk whose fingers are stained dark with ink. He notices your glance and smiles tiredly. "Scriptorium," he explains. "Of course. The monastery depends on skinwork almost as much as the tannery itself. Books here are bound in leather, belts hang from every robe, sandals, satchels, gloves, knife sheaths, parchment straps all made from animal hide shaped carefully by human hands. Even the pages used by scribes often begin as treated calfskin parchment stretched and scraped until smooth enough for holy words. The monk gestures for you to follow him deeper into the abbey. You pass through corridors smelling faintly of candle smoke, dust, and old stone dampened by winter air. Somewhere distant, voices chant softly in Latin. Their rhythm rolls through the halls like slow-moving water. At last you enter the scriptorium. Warmth and silence settle around you immediately. Long tables stand beneath narrow windows where pale daylight spills across scattered parchment sheets. Monks bend over manuscripts with aching concentration, their robes rustling softly as quills scratch across the pages. The sound is oddly comforting. Scratch, pause, dip, scratch again. Civilization, you realize, often advances through extremely patient people sitting quietly indoors while everyone else freezes outside. Bundles of prepared parchment rest along the walls beside stretched calfskins waiting for treatment. You move closer, surprised by their softness. The surface feels smooth beneath your fingertips, faintly warm from the room. A grey-bearded binder looks up from repairing a leather spine. "Good hide lasts longer than kings," he murmurs. Then he returns to work without further explanation. Some swear monasteries preserve the finest leather-working knowledge in all Christendom. Others insist the brothers merely steal methods from travelling craftsmen and improve them through obsessive repetition. No one can quite agree. What is clear, however, is this: the monks understand patience. You watch one brother polishing parchment carefully with pumice stone while another threads leather strips through a heavy book cover reinforced by brass corners. Nearby, a novice warms glue beside a candle flame, trying very hard not to spill it. He spills it immediately. The older monks sigh with ancient disappointment. A small smile passes quietly around the room anyway. Near midday, the bell calls the brothers toward prayer. Work pauses at once. Quills are set down, ink pots covered, hands folded. The transition happens so smoothly it feels rehearsed across centuries. Perhaps it has been. You remain near the fire in the guest house while snow begins drifting lightly outside once more. A servant brings bowls of lentil pottage with coarse bread and a little smoked eel. The warmth spreads slowly through your hands while travellers around you speak in low murmurs about roads, taxes, relics, weather, and rumours of wolves near the eastern forest. One merchant proudly displays fur-lined gloves trimmed with squirrel pelts. "Bought them from a Lombard trader," he announces. Another man eyes the gloves skeptically. "Too fine for muddy roads." The merchant pulls them closer protectively. Fashion, even now, begins quietly through envy. As afternoon fades, the ink-stained monk rejoins you beside the hearth, carrying repaired bindings wrapped carefully in cloth. "You come from the tanneries," he says. You nod. He studies the fire thoughtfully. "Strange, isn't it hunters kill beasts in frozen forests? Tanners scrape hides beside foul rivers, cobblers stitch boots in smoky lanes, and here," he gestures toward the library halls beyond, "here the same skins carry prayers, laws, songs, and memory." Outside, snow whispers against the abbey windows. The monk smiles faintly. God writes on curious material. Evening bells begin again as darkness settles over the monastery hill. Candlelight glows warmly across leather bindings stacked beside the hearth. and for a moment the entire world feels stitched together by hide, thread, smoke, and careful human hands working patiently against cold and time. By the next morning the snow has softened into freezing rain, which somehow feels even more insulting. Water drips steadily from the abbey roofs while the courtyard turns slick beneath countless muddy footprints. A novice struggles across the stones carrying 2 buckets and loses an argument with gravity halfway to the well. The monks barely look up. Clearly this happens often. You leave the monastery after dawn prayers, descending the hill beside merchants, pilgrims, and villagers wrapped tightly against the damp cold. Bells continue ringing behind you as the abbey fades slowly into grey mist above the town. Below, market day has already begun. Even before you reach the square, the sounds arrive: first cartwheels rattling over stone, traders shouting prices, sheep bleating in offended confusion, children laughing somewhere near the pie stalls. Smoke from cook fires mingles with wet wool, horse sweat, onions frying in grease, and the sharp, familiar scent of leather carried from the river quarter. The whole town seems to flow toward the market like water gathering into a basin. You step beneath rows of dripping awnings stretched across the square. Rain taps steadily against the canvas overhead, while puddles spread between crooked wooden stalls. Vendors stamp their feet for warmth. Geese wander beneath tables searching for dropped crumbs with ruthless determination. The brown dog appears beside you again as if summoned directly from legend. He now wears someone's missing glove around his neck like a trophy. No one questions this anymore. Market squares reveal the true heart of medieval life, not castles, not battlefields, markets. Here people trade survival 1 coin at a time beneath rain-soaked cloth, while bells ring overhead and mud swallows boots whole. You move slowly through the crowd, watching how animal skins have already become part of nearly everything around you. A fur merchant displays squirrel pelts in careful rows beneath an oiled canopy. Their grey-brown softness catches faint candlelight from nearby lanterns. Beside him hangs heavier fox fur trimmed in deep rust red, meant for wealthy sleeves and noble collars. Winter softness, the merchant calls. Better than 2 blankets and less argumentative than a wife. His own wife sits beside the stall, glaring at him with terrifying calm. You continue walking before witnessing history end violently. Nearby, a leatherworker arranges belts, gloves, satchels, knife sheaths, and sturdy boots atop rough wool cloth. Rain beads beautifully across the polished surfaces. Some items are plain and practical. Others carry small touches of vanity-stamped patterns, dyed edges, brass studs, fur trim around cuffs. Fashion creeps quietly into usefulness here. No one announces it. It simply appears little by little through decoration, comfort, and pride. A young apprentice holds up a pair of leather shoes lined with rabbit fur. Soft enough for a bishop, he promises. An old woman pokes the sole suspiciously. Can they survive cow mud? The apprentice hesitates. Moderate cow mud. That answer appears honest enough to earn a sale. The market grows thicker toward midday. Pilgrims wrapped in patched cloaks brush shoulders with merchants in fur-lined caps. A noble steward passes carrying gloves so fine they almost shine beneath the rain. Fishermen wear oil-darkened leather aprons stiff from river work. Even children tug at mitten cords made from scraps of cured hide. Everywhere you look, skin has become civilization's second layer. A butcher hacks salted meat beneath striped awnings, while his assistant wipes greasy hands on a leather apron blackened with years of use. Across the lane, a saddler oils harness straps beside hanging bridles adorned with tiny brass bells. You pause at a stall selling dyed gloves. Red, Brown, faded blue, even a rare green pair trimmed in white fur. The glovemaker notices your interest. Colour matters now, she says proudly. That feels important somehow. For generations, hides simply protected people from cold and rain. But now merchants speak of softness, colour, elegance, trimming, appearance. Wealthy townsfolk increasingly choose garments not only for survival, but for beauty. The transformation happens slowly enough few notice it. Necessity learns refinement one stitch at a time. Rain continues falling steadily over the market square while bells ring the noon hour. Vendors pull cloaks tighter and light extra candles beneath awnings. Steam rises from cooking pots filled with cabbage stew and thick pottage. You buy a heel of coarse bread and a little smoked eel wrapped in cloth. The brown dog sits beside you immediately with unbearable optimism. You share part of the bread. He accepts this arrangement as his natural right. Across the square, a travelling merchant from farther south opens a chest lined in lamb's wool. Gasps ripple quietly through nearby shoppers. Inside rests imported leather softer than anything you have yet seen. Dyed crimson. Not bright modern crimson, but deep muted red like old wine seen through candlelight. A wealthy merchant's daughter reaches out carefully to touch it. Her mother immediately slaps her hand away. Too expensive. The girl stares anyway. That look lingers in your mind. No one can quite agree when clothing first became fashion instead of simple necessity. Some blame merchants bringing foreign styles across muddy trade roads. Others blame nobles desperate to appear wealthier than neighbouring families. A few weary priests likely blame vanity itself, which must honestly feel exhausting after several centuries. Still, standing beneath the rain among leather gloves, fur-lined boots, polished belts, and dyed cloaks, you can almost watch the shift happening in real time. People begin wanting beauty even in hardship, perhaps especially in hardship. Toward afternoon the weather worsens again. Wind pushes rain sideways beneath the awnings while merchants tie ropes tighter against snapping canvas. The square darkens under heavy clouds. Yet trade continues stubbornly onward. A cobbler argues over boot prices with a farmer whose trousers are soaked to the knees. A noble servant quietly purchases ermine trim from a guarded furrier. 2 monks inspect leather satchels for carrying manuscripts through wet weather. Near the fountain, an old storyteller gathers listeners beneath a dripping canopy. He holds up a fox pelt dramatically. Some swear fox fur sharpens cleverness, he says. Though I once knew a man who wore 3 fox pelts at once and still married his cousin's widow after mistaking her for someone else during Candlemas. The crowd chuckles softly. Perhaps, the storyteller adds, the foxes had already given up on him. Even the jokes here arrive wrapped in cold rain and damp wool. As evening approaches, torches begin flickering alive around the market square. Their reflections shimmer across puddles between the stalls. Smoke thickens overhead. Merchants count coins beside candle stubs while guards patrol the edges of the crowd beneath dripping cloaks. You linger a while longer beneath the awnings, watching townsfolk disappear gradually into the darkening streets carrying purchases wrapped in cloth and leather. Gloves for winter, boots for muddy roads, fur collars for pride, belts for labour, satchels for journeys not yet taken, and somewhere beneath all of it, hidden quietly inside every stitch and buckle, remains the memory of forests, rivers, hunters, smoke, frost, and patient human hands learning slowly how to wear the wild itself. Night rain lingers into the early hours, drumming softly against shutters and soaking the town beneath a cold silver haze. By dawn the streets shine black with water and churned mud. Thin wisps of smoke rise from chimneys into the pale morning sky, while stable boys curse quietly at frozen harness buckles. You wake in the loft above the leather workshop once more, though the place already feels strangely familiar now. The rafters creak. The fire downstairs snaps softly. The brown dog sleeps across the doorway with all four paws twitching in dreams of crime. The grandmother nudges the hearth awake with an iron poker. "Up," she says, "you're visiting rich people today." This statement carries the same tone another person might use for "we are marching toward danger." Outside, the market square still glistens from yesterday's rain. Merchants pull open shutters while women sweep muddy rushes from thresholds into the gutters. A fish seller yells about eels with such passion you suspect he personally invented them. You follow the workshop woman through winding lanes climbing toward the wealthier quarter near the inner walls. Gradually the town changes around you. Streets widen slightly. Timber houses give way to stone foundations. Windows grow larger. Chimneys taller, doors heavier, reinforced with iron bands polished by generations of hands. Even the mud seems wealthier here. A pair of servants pass carrying baskets beneath wool cloaks trimmed with pale fur. Their boots are cleaner than yours have been at any point during this journey, which feels mildly offensive. At last you arrive before a merchant manor tucked behind a high oak gate. A carved iron knocker hangs shaped like a lion's head, though years of rain have softened the creature into something more tired than terrifying. The gate opens after several long moments. Warmth spills outward immediately. Inside, the courtyard smells of wet hay, horse leather, wood smoke, and rosemary drifting from a kitchen vent. Servants cross the stones carrying firewood beneath the watchful eyes of a steward wrapped in a dark fur-lined mantle. The workshop woman carries bundles of finished leather goods carefully wrapped in cloth gloves, belts, trimmed cuffs, repaired riding boots. You follow her into the manor hall where heat gathers richly beneath soot-dark rafters. And there, perhaps for the first time during this journey, you see what animal skins become when survival no longer stands entirely alone. Comfort, status, quiet competition. The hall glows with beeswax candlelight reflecting across polished wood. Thick wool tapestries soften the stone walls. Fir throws drape over benches near the hearth where logs crackle warmly. A pair of hunting dogs sleeps beneath a table large enough to host an entire village argument. At the far end of the hall, the merchant's wife sits beside the fire while a servant adjusts the lining of her winter mantle. The cloak is magnificent by local standards. Deep blue wool outside, soft grey squirrel fur inside. Silver clasps at the throat catching candlelight whenever she moves. Not excessive enough to offend the church, perhaps, but certainly close enough to make priests nervous. She notices the workshop woman immediately. Good, the gloves. The bundles are opened. One pair after another emerges into the warm light. Rabbit-lined riding gloves. Soft calfskin dyed dark chestnut. Fur-trimmed cuffs delicate enough to belong to someone who has never personally shoveled manure. The merchant's wife slips one glove onto her hand and smiles faintly. It feels softer now. Worked with oil twice more, the workshop woman replies, and smoked lightly. The noblewoman nods approvingly. You stand quietly nearby, observing how differently leather behaves in this world compared to the tannery quarter below the river. There, hide steam beside muddy pits. Here, they whisper softly against embroidered sleeves while servants pour warmed wine. Same material, different life. A young girl enters the hall carrying folded cloth. Perhaps the merchant's daughter. She cannot be more than 13, though already her sleeves are lined with pale fur and tiny stitched patterns along the cuffs. She pauses beside the hearth. Mother says fox trim is vulgar now. The older woman barely looks up. Only when overused. This appears to be serious social knowledge. The girl nods solemnly as though receiving sacred wisdom. Fashion in the medieval world moves quietly through households like this, not with grand announcements, not with sudden revolutions, just whispers about fur quality, imported dyes, softer gloves, finer stitching, narrower sleeves. One wealthy woman envies another. Then a market changes. Servants bring morning food while rain taps softly against the shutters. Trenchers of bread appear beside smoked fish, pears preserved in honey, and warm spiced ale. A boy stirs the fire while another servant brushes mud from riding boots near the door. Everything here depends upon leather and fur in ways both visible and invisible. Harness straps hold the horses outside. Leather hinges secure travelling chests. Fur linings soften winter cloaks. Boots survive muddy roads. Gloves protect delicate hands from frost. Even luxury rests upon the old harsh logic of survival. The merchant himself enters eventually, broad-shouldered and red-faced from inspecting warehouses near the docks. His cloak smells faintly of wet wool and horse sweat despite its expensive fur collar. He greets the workshop woman warmly. "Roads worsening again," he mutters while removing gloves. 2 carts stuck near the eastern bridge. He tosses the gloves onto the table carelessly. Fine leather, rabbit lining, rain-darkened cuffs. Even wealth cannot entirely escape mud. The conversation drifts toward trade routes and winter shipments while servants continue mending garments beside the fire. You watch one older woman carefully sewing squirrel fur into the inside hem of a child's cloak. Tiny stitches. Slow patience. The kind of labour rarely noticed once finished. Some swear noble households wear certain furs for luck as much as appearance. Marten for prosperity, fox for wit, lamb for peaceful sleep. Even now, it is hard to tell whether such beliefs survive from old pagan customs or simply linger because wealthy people enjoy attaching mystical importance to expensive things. Near midday, the merchant's wife shows the workshop woman a newer garment recently arrived from farther south. A fitted leather riding coat. Dyed deep burgundy. The stitching alone probably cost more than an ordinary villager earns in months. French style, she says quietly. The workshop woman touches the sleeve carefully. Beautiful work. And it is. Not merely useful now. Beautiful on purpose. You realize suddenly how enormous that change truly is. Humanity once wore skins because cold nights killed the unwary. But here, inside warm halls glowing with candlelight, people shape leather and fur into identity itself. Rank, taste, ambition, desire. The old survival materials remain, yet they have learned elegance. Outside, rain darkens the courtyard stones while servants hurry between storehouses carrying cloaks tight around their shoulders. Somewhere in the stable yard a horse stamps impatiently against the weather. The brown dog, astonishingly, has followed you all the way here. He sits outside the kitchen door, stealing scraps from distracted servants with professional efficiency. Honestly, if medieval guilds recognized talent properly, he would already hold senior membership. As evening approaches, candles are lit throughout the hall. Fur-lined cloaks hang drying near the hearth while soft conversation drifts beneath the rafters. And you sit quietly beside the fire watching warmth gather inside carefully crafted leather gloves, understanding at last that fashion begins not from vanity alone, but from humanity's endless desire to make survival feel gentler, softer, and a little more beautiful against the cold. The rain finally passes sometime before dawn, leaving the town wrapped in cold silver fog and dripping silence. Water falls steadily from roof edges into the gutters below, and the streets glisten beneath a thin layer of half-frozen mud that clings to boots with personal determination. You leave the merchant manor early, carrying the lingering warmth of its hearth with you like a borrowed memory. The richer quarter fades behind stone walls and shuttered windows while the town slowly wakes beneath low grey skies. A baker opens his stall near the square, releasing the smell of rye bread into the damp air. Somewhere farther off, a pig screams with startling emotional honesty. Bells sound the morning hour. A stable boy slips in the mud while carrying oats and invents at least 3 new insults for weather itself. Medieval mornings possess a very particular rhythm. Smoke, mud, cold fingers, someone yelling at livestock. You find yourself wandering toward the narrower southern lanes where craftsmen live and work beneath leaning timber houses. Here the streets tighten into twisting passages barely wide enough for carts. Laundry hangs overhead between upper windows. Rainwater drips from sagging awnings. The smell of wood smoke mixes with leather oil and damp wool drying near hearth vents. At the end of one crooked lane, beneath a faded painted boot swinging gently above the doorway, you find the cobbler's workshop. The inside feels immediately warmer than the street, though only barely. Heat gathers around a small hearth near the wall, while candles flicker across rows of hanging tools. Leather scraps cover nearly every surface. Awls, knives, wooden shoe forms, coils of thread, and little jars of grease sit scattered across benches polished smooth by years of labour. The cobbler himself barely looks up when you enter. "Mind the nails," he mutters. You nearly step directly on a pile of them anyway. He sits hunched over a boot beside the window where weak daylight spills across his work table. His beard is thick with grey. Tiny bits of leather cling stubbornly to his sleeves. One eye squints more than the other from decades spent stitching by candlelight. Beside him, a young apprentice works a stiff strip of leather back and forth with both hands. "Too rigid," the cobbler grumbles. "You want boots, not armour for frightened chickens." The apprentice nods solemnly. This advice appears entirely normal here. You settle quietly near the hearth while the workshop fills slowly with morning visitors. A farmer arrives first, carrying split boots crusted in dried manure. Then a widow needing fresh straps sewn onto winter shoes. Then a carter whose soles have nearly dissolved after weeks hauling goods through frozen roads. Every customer brings mud into the room. The cobbler no longer notices. Shoes, you quickly realise, may be among the most important objects in medieval life. Roads are dreadful, streets worse, winters cruel. One broken sole can turn travel into misery within hours. Wet feet become sickness. Sickness becomes danger. Good boots stand between civilization and trench foot. The cobbler lifts a finished riding boot toward the light, inspecting the stitching carefully. "Leather must bend with the foot," he says. "Otherwise the foot eventually declares war." This sounds like wisdom earned painfully. You watch him work through the morning with astonishing patience. Needle through leather, pull thread tight, trim edge smooth, rub oil carefully into seams, every movement slow and practiced. Nothing here is hurried. Even necessity takes time. Above the workbench hang finished shoes of every kind, rough peasant boots thick with hobnails, soft fur-lined slippers for wealthier homes, sturdy riding boots, children's shoes patched repeatedly at the toes. Each pair tells a story about the life waiting outside this workshop. Farmers need durability. Merchants want appearance. Pilgrims require endurance. Nobles prefer elegance with plausible practicality. The apprentice shows you a pair of tiny winter boots lined with rabbit fur. "For twins," he says proudly. The cobbler grunts. Mother demanded softer leather. She paid extra. Then softness becomes holy law. The The apprentice smiles faintly and continues polishing the tiny shoes with sheep grease until they gleam softly beside the fire. Outside, fog drifts through the lane while rainwater continues dripping from roof beams. Somewhere above the workshop, someone shakes out wet blankets through a window and nearly hits a passing monk. The monk does not swear aloud, but his silence carries remarkable creativity. Near midday, the brown dog wanders into the workshop again, soaked from nose to tail. Without hesitation, he curls directly beside the hearth. The cobbler glances down. "You owe me 2 sausages and half a glove," he informs the dog. The dog closes his eyes peacefully. Case dismissed. As the day passes, you begin noticing how leather carries traces of every hand that touches it. Boots crease where feet bend, gloves darken at the fingertips, belts soften along the waist, patches tell stories of old repairs and careful thrift. Nothing is wasted here if it can still serve. A traveller enters during the afternoon carrying a cracked pilgrim satchel. Pilgrim badges jingle faintly from the strap little pewter saints, tiny shells, worn tokens from distant shrines. "Road split the stitching," he explains. The cobbler examines the satchel. "Roads do that." The pilgrim warms stiff fingers near the fire while repairs begin. He speaks quietly about muddy crossings, roadside chapels, frozen river banks, and wolves heard somewhere north beyond the abbey forests. Some swear wolves avoid travellers wearing wolfskin trim themselves. Others insist this only confuses the animals briefly before everyone involved regrets the experiment. No one can quite agree. The cobbler repairs the satchel using thick waxed thread drawn carefully through softened leather. His hands move with near monastic focus. Around you, the workshop glows softly in the dim afternoon light. Beeswax candles flicker against hanging tools. Smoke curls lazily towards soot-dark rafters. The smell of leather oil and damp wool settles heavily into the air, while boots dry beside the hearth. This place feels small, ordinary, yet entire lives depend upon work like this. Without cobblers, roads become impossible, trade slows, pilgrimages shorten, winters grow deadlier, feet fail before ambitions do. The cobbler suddenly holds up a finished boot toward you. "See there." He points at the sole. Double-layered, better for marsh roads. You nod. He seems satisfied enough to continue. For a while the only sounds are stitching, crackling firewood, and distant bells echoing through the fog outside. The rhythm becomes strangely calming. Needle, pull, tighten, repeat. Civilization itself sometimes feels like one endless repair job performed beside a cold hearth. By evening, the lane outside darkens into wet blue twilight. Customers disappear homeward carrying repaired boots wrapped beneath cloaks. Candles glow warmly through the workshop shutters. Rain begins lightly once more, tapping soft patterns against the roof overhead. The cobbler finishes his final stitch and leans back with a quiet groan. "Feet," he mutters, rubbing tired eyes. Humanity insists on having far too many of them. The apprentice laughs despite himself. You sit beside the fire a little longer, watching rows of finished shoes hanging quietly in the candlelight, each pair shaped from animal skin once carried through forests, rivers, frost, and smoke, and now carrying human lives onward through mud instead. Rain lingers through the night again, though softer now, more like a steady whisper against the rooftops than a storm. By dawn the town smells richly of wet wood, chimney smoke, and soaked earth. Mist drifts low between the houses while pale light spreads slowly over the muddy streets. You leave the cobbler's workshop wrapped tightly in a borrowed wool cloak, still carrying the scent of leather oil and hearth smoke, behind you. The old cobbler already bends once more over his bench while the apprentice struggles heroically against a tangled spool of waxed thread. The brown dog follows for a while, then disappears mysteriously beneath a butcher's cart with suspicious speed. You suspect professional obligations. The town gates stand open this morning despite the weather. Pilgrims gather near the road beyond the walls, cloaked figures with walking staffs, patched satchels, broad hats dripping rainwater, and little pewter badges pinned to their chests. The pilgrim roads never fully sleep. Even in poor weather, people travel toward shrines, abbeys, relics, holy wells, saints' tombs, and promises whispered across distant hills. Some seek forgiveness, others healing, some merely flee debts in creatively spiritual ways. One elderly traveller adjusts a leather strap around his shoulder while muttering, "Saints guide my feet and preserve my knees." A very practical prayer. You join the small procession heading south along the river road. Mud sucks at boots immediately. Water drips from bare tree branches overhead. Wagon tracks carve deep scars through the road where carts have passed during wetter days. Within half an hour, you understand why medieval travellers value leather so fiercely. Everything here rubs, pulls, tears, leaks, freezes, or breaks. Good boots matter, strong satchels matter, thick gloves matter, waterproof wrappings matter. Civilization beyond town walls depends heavily upon straps and stitching holding together under miserable conditions. The pilgrims move slowly through the morning fog. A monk leads prayers quietly at intervals while others murmur along beneath dripping hoods. Little bells tied to mule harnesses jingle softly ahead. You walk beside a broad-shouldered pilgrim carrying a leather water skin patched at least 6 separate times. Road from the north ruined the original stitching, he explains proudly, but she still holds ale. This seems the important detail. His satchel hangs across one shoulder, decorated with tarnished pilgrim badges from shrines scattered across half the kingdom. Tiny pewter saints knock softly together whenever he walks. The leather strap has darkened smooth from years of use. Everything on the pilgrim road wears slowly into softness through contact with human life. Around midday, the rain finally eases into drifting mist. The road enters low woodland where wet leaves carpet the ground beneath bare winter branches. Ravens watch silently from above while travellers pick careful paths around deep mud pits. One woman unwraps her hands briefly near a roadside fire. Her gloves are lined with rabbit fur. "Best purchase I ever made," she sighs. Another traveller snorts. "Second best." The woman raises an eyebrow. "First, marriage to a brewer's daughter." A fair answer, honestly. You stop beside a small roadside shrine built into the roots of an ancient oak tree. Candles flicker behind damp glass before a faded saint's image barely visible beneath soot and wax drippings. Pilgrims leave tiny offerings there, copper coins, dried flowers, scraps of cloth, a little leather cord tied carefully around a branch. Some swear leather charms hung near shrines absorb sickness from travellers. Others claim wolves avoid camps protected by strips of blessed hide. Even now, no one can fully agree where faith ends and habit begins. Still, nearly everyone touches the shrine while passing. Just in case. By afternoon, the road grows busier. Merchants with pack horses pass carrying bundles wrapped in treated leather against the weather. A messenger rides by wearing high riding boots polished dark against the mud. 2 nuns travel together beneath heavy cloaks lined with sheepskin. Every traveller carries leather somewhere. Belts, pouches, boots, gloves, satchels, harness straps. Animal skin has become the quiet framework holding movement itself together. You begin noticing the incredible variety in these objects. A poor pilgrim's cracked belt repaired with knotted cord, a merchant's elegant calfskin gloves dyed soft brown, thick leather water skins blackened by years beside campfires, tiny purses stitched carefully by wives waiting back home. Fashion travels roads like these, not through grand declarations, through imitation. A traveller sees softer gloves in another town. A merchant notices fur trim in a distant market. A noblewoman glimpses foreign stitching on pilgrimage. Then styles wander homeward slowly beside muddy boots. Toward evening the group reaches a small roadside inn crouched beside a bridge crossing the river. Smoke curls heavily from its chimney. Lantern light glows amber through greasy window cloth. The stable smells hit first wet horse, hay, manure, leather tack soaked from travel. Honestly, it feels comforting now. Inside the alehouse, warmth crashes over you immediately. Firelight dances across oak beams blackened by decades of smoke. Travellers crowd shoulder to shoulder at rough wooden tables while steam rises from soaked cloaks hanging near the hearth. The innkeeper serves thick pottage, coarse bread, and ale dark enough to qualify as emotional support. You settle near the fire among pilgrims drying boots and wringing rainwater from gloves. One old traveller carefully oils his satchel straps while speaking quietly to a younger companion. Road eats leather if ignored. The younger man nods solemnly as though hearing holy instruction. Nearby, a woman removes fur-lined boots and stretches aching feet toward the hearth with visible gratitude. Steam curls gently upward from damp wool stockings. No palace in Christendom, she murmurs, matches dry socks. Several travellers immediately agree. The conversation drifts lazily through the evening. Stories of flooded roads, broken wagon wheels, shrines where miracles supposedly happened, inns where the fleas possess stronger local government than the mayor. Someone mentions a monastery farther south where monks make gloves so soft they feel like holding warm bread. No one questions this as a valid measurement. Near the fire hangs an assortment of travelling gear drying slowly overnight: leather satchels, belts, water skins, riding gloves, fur cloaks crusted faintly with road salt and mud. The objects seem strangely intimate in firelight. Worn, trusted, human. You realize these travellers depend upon skin not only for warmth, but for endurance itself. Leather bends with movement. Fur preserves heat during long rides. Treated hides resist rain better than woven cloth alone. Animal skin became humanity's portable shelter, long before people thought of it as style. The brown dog appears suddenly beneath your table. No one knows how. He steals a sausage and vanishes again before consequences arrive. Some creatures truly belong to the roads. Outside, rain begins softly once more against the inn shutters, while travellers settle deeper beneath wool blankets and heavy cloaks. Bells from a distant chapel drift faintly through the dark valley beyond the bridge. You sit quietly by the hearth watching firelight flicker across drying leather boots lined beside the wall, understanding now how the long muddy roads of the medieval world helped transform simple hides into objects people carried not merely for survival, but almost for comfort, identity, and home itself. The inn settles slowly into silence after midnight. Rain softens against the shutters until it becomes little more than a faint hiss beyond the walls, mingling with the crackle of dying embers and the occasional snore from exhausted pilgrims wrapped in wool blankets beside the hearth. Somewhere upstairs, floorboards creak. Somewhere outside, a horse stamps impatiently in the stable. And beneath your bench, the brown dog sleeps curled like a fox, one stolen sausage still clutched triumphantly between his paws. Morning comes pale and damp. Mist rises from the river beside the bridge while travellers gather themselves piece by piece, boots pulled on, belts tightened, gloves searched for beneath benches. The innkeeper ladles oat porridge into wooden bowls with the expression of a man who has watched humanity make poor decisions for decades. You linger near the fire while pilgrims prepare for the road again. One old woman ties strips of leather around her ankles beneath her skirts. For warmth, you ask. For my joints, she replies. Then, after a pause, and perhaps against spirits. This feels entirely believable here. The medieval world breathes with little customs like these. Small habits carried quietly from village to village until no one remembers where they began. Charms tucked into sleeves, fur stitched secretly into hems, leather cords knotted around wrists against fever or misfortune. No one can quite agree whether such things truly work, but almost everyone keeps one anyway. The road today follows dense woodland southward. Bare branches claw softly at the grey sky while wet leaves rot beneath the mist. Travellers move more quietly now, each wrapped inside private thoughts and steady footfalls through the mud. You walk beside a narrow-faced pilgrim wearing a wolfskin trim around his hood. For protection, you ask. He touches the fur carefully. My grandmother swore wolves leave their own kind alone. And do they? He shrugs. I have not been eaten yet. Again, difficult to argue with medieval logic. By midday the rain stops entirely. Weak sunlight filters through the clouds, turning droplets along the branches into tiny silver sparks. The road widens briefly near an abandoned shrine overgrown with moss and ivy. Travellers pause there to rest. The shrine itself barely remains standing. A cracked saint's figure leans inside a weathered alcove blackened by smoke and time. Someone has left beeswax candles near the base, alongside tiny offerings, dried herbs, copper pennies, bits of ribbon, a rabbit foot tied with red thread. One pilgrim touches a leather charm hanging beside the shrine doorway. Against sickness, he explains quietly. The charm looks ancient, soft with age, darkened by countless hands. An older woman nearby snorts softly. My mother carried one through 3 winters and still caught fever twice. The pilgrim nods thoughtfully. Yes, but perhaps without it she would have caught fever 4 times. This apparently settles the matter. You sit beside the roadside fire while travellers warm bread over the flames. Smoke drifts lazily through the trees, carrying scents of damp earth and pine sap. Nearby, a young mother pulls rabbit-lined mittens onto her little boy's hands before rubbing goose fat gently into his cracked knuckles. Cold bites harder than wolves, she murmurs. That sentence lingers with you. Because it is true. Most medieval fears are practical at their core. Winter, hunger, illness, wet feet, failed harvests. The supernatural merely gathers around these anxieties like fog around trees. Animal skins become tangled inside all of it. Protection against frost. Protection against rain. Protection against unseen things lurking at the edges of uncertain nights. One traveller claims fox fur prevents nightmares if sewn beneath a pillow. Another insists sleeping on wolf pelts causes troubling dreams of forests and blood. A monk quietly warns that vanity through excessive fur trimming invites moral decay. The merchant beside him glances down at his expensive squirrel-lined gloves and pulls them slightly deeper into his sleeves. Even now, centuries later, humanity remains remarkably skilled at hearing criticism and assuming it applies to someone else. The road continues through the afternoon beneath cold, bright skies. Ravens circle overhead while distant bells drift faintly from unseen chapels beyond the hills. You begin noticing leather charms everywhere once you know to look. A tiny pouch hanging beneath a cloak clasp. Strips of cured hide braided into horse tack. Little stitched tokens tucked beside satchel straps. One pilgrim even wears a narrow leather band pressed with the shape of St. Christopher around his boot. For safe crossings, he explains. You cross rivers often. I trip often. Fair enough. Toward evening, the travellers reach a tiny village crouched beside frozen fields and low stone walls. Smoke curls upward from turf-roofed cottages, while chickens scratch half-heartedly through muddy straw near the lanes. You shelter inside a small alehouse warmed by peat smoke and crowded with villagers escaping the cold. The room smells wonderfully human. Wet wool, onion stew, leather gloves drying beside the fire, old smoke trapped in rafters blackened across generations. An elderly woman near the hearth examines your cloak thoughtfully. Fox trim. You nod. Good for sharp winters, she says, though my grandmother swore hair fur keeps ghosts away better. A man beside her scoffs gently into his ale. Ghosts avoid poor villagers already. Laughter moves softly through the room. The conversation drifts toward old stories as darkness gathers outside. Villagers speak of hunters who vanished during snowstorms, shepherds who heard singing beyond frozen marshes, travellers saved by charms sewn secretly into their coats. Some swear certain furs remember the nature of the animals they once belonged to. Fox for cunning, bear for strength, hare for swiftness, wolf for endurance. Even now, sitting beside the hearth while rainwater hisses softly in the chimney, it becomes difficult not to feel the strange intimacy between people and the skins they wear. Not merely clothing, something older, a relationship shaped through centuries of cold nights and dangerous roads. The brown dog appears again beneath the table near your boots, astonishingly muddy and somehow carrying an entire meat pie crust in his mouth. The innkeeper points accusingly. You. The dog vanishes instantly into darkness. No one pursues him. Some battles have already been lost. Later, as the fire burns lower and villagers settle beneath wool blankets near the walls, you sit quietly listening to the wind outside moving through bare winter trees. Leather satchels hang drying near the hearth. Rabbit-lined gloves rest beside steaming boots. Tiny charms sway gently from travelling cloaks. And all around you, in ways both practical and mysterious, animal skins continue shaping not only how people survive the medieval world, but how they understand luck, fear, comfort, and the unseen shadows lingering just beyond the firelight. The village alehouse grows quieter as the night deepens, though never entirely silent. Firewood settles in the hearth with soft cracking sighs. Wind brushes the shutters, somewhere outside. A loose sign creaks steadily above the muddy lane like an old sailor complaining in his sleep. You wake before dawn wrapped in wool blankets near the embers. The air smells of peat smoke, damp leather, and yesterday's onion stew lingering stubbornly in the rafters. Around you, travellers still sleep beneath cloaks and fur-lined mantles while the innkeeper's wife quietly sweeps rushes across the floor. The brown dog lies directly beside the warmest stones of the hearth. Naturally. He opens one eye as you stir, judges you entirely unimportant, then returns to sleep. Outside, frost silvers the village beneath pale morning light. Thin ice rims the puddles. Chickens move reluctantly through the cold like creatures deeply reconsidering existence. Today the road leads only a short distance before the travellers separate. Some continue south toward larger shrines. Others turn east toward market towns and ferry crossings. You find yourself following a merchant wagon toward a nearby borough known for its leather guilds. Best glove makers this side of the river, the wagon driver says proudly. Then, after a pause, also the loudest arguments. An encouraging combination. The road improves slightly as you near the town. Stone markers appear beside the ditches. Small farms cluster along the hillsides where smoke rises from winter hearths. Leather strips flap gently from fence posts to scare crows away from frostbitten fields. Some swear crows fear the scent of treated hide. Others claim farmers simply enjoy hanging strange things in fields during winter boredom. By midday you arrive before a stout-walled borough smelling richly of smoke, horses, and wet oak bark. The leather district lies near the southern gate where workshops crowd together beneath hanging signs shaped like boots, gloves, saddles, belts, and fur caps. Noise greets you immediately. Hammering, shouting, cartwheels grinding over cobbles, apprentices arguing about deliveries, a woman yelling that someone has ruined 3 weeks of dye work. The guild quarter breathes with restless energy, unlike the slower tannery town behind you. Here the craft has become organised, competitive, proud. You pass beneath a painted sign reading the Honourable Company of Curers, Cobblers, and Leather Workers, though several letters have faded beneath weather and pigeon damage. Inside the Guildhall courtyard, craftsmen move busily between workshops carrying bundles of treated hide. Smoke drifts upward from dye vats, while rows of gloves and belts hang drying beneath covered galleries. A guildmaster notices your curiosity. He's a broad man wrapped in a heavy fur-trimmed mantle, his leather apron stamped with the guild seal. Rings glint on his fingers when he gestures. "Careful where you step," he warns. "That vat stain's worse than confession." You avoid the vat immediately. The guild hall itself feels both practical and ceremonial. Long tables fill the central chamber beneath carved rafters darkened by centuries of smoke. Candles burn before painted patron saints. Samples of fine leatherwork hang proudly along the walls, embossed saddles, dyed gloves, stitched riding boots, ceremonial belts. This is no longer merely survival work. It is trade, reputation, artisanship. A young apprentice hurries past, carrying folded calfskin dyed rich green. Another follows, balancing polished boot forms almost as tall as himself. The guildmaster snorts. "Boy's got talent," he says. "Terrible sense. Once pointed shoes long enough to stab chickens from across a room." Apparently fashion continues making questionable choices across every century. You spend the afternoon moving between workshops where leather workers practice their specialized crafts with fierce concentration. One maker focuses entirely on riding gloves. Another creates ornate belts stamped with hunting scenes. A third dyes soft calfskin using expensive imported pigments guarded almost like military secrets. No one here simply works leather. Each craftsman claims mastery over a particular piece of the trade. The glove maker shows you a pair lined with ermine trim. "For a bishop," she explains. Nearby, another artisan sniffs dismissively. "Too delicate." The glove maker rolls her eyes. "You think everything should survive battlefield mud? It should survive soup at minimum." Their argument clearly began years ago and may continue until death. Guilds, you learn, protect methods obsessively. Apprenticeships last years. Certain stitching techniques pass only through trusted families. Dyes, oils, tanning mixtures, fur treatments all guarded carefully against rivals. Some swear one workshop secretly softens leather using egg yolks and milk. Others insist another uses strange herbs imported by sea traders from warmer lands. No one fully agrees, and no guild member confirms anything. You pause beside a master saddler embossing tiny patterns into dark leather with heated brass tools. His work is astonishingly precise. Vines, knots, little hunting hounds no larger than your thumb. "Decoration matters now," he says quietly without looking up. "There was always decoration. Not like this." He gestures toward the elegant saddle hanging nearby. "A farmer buys survival. A noble buys appearance. The distinction feels important. Elsewhere in the guild hall, wealthy customers inspect finished goods beside candlelit tables, fur-lined gloves, dyed riding boots, decorative belts with silver buckles, even leather purses stitched in foreign styles brought along trade routes. Fashion has fully entered the guild quarter, not loudly, but permanently. Toward evening, the guild members gather for a communal meal in the main hall. Long trenchers of bread appear beside smoked fish, onions, thick stew, and dark ale carried in heavy pitchers. Conversation rolls endlessly through the smoky room. Complaints about taxes, arguments about stitching quality, rumours of foreign fashions arriving through southern ports. One elderly craftsman claims noblewomen now prefer softer squirrel trim over fox fur. Another nearly chokes on his ale in outrage. Squirrel for winter cloaks. Apparently. What's wrong with fox? Fashion. The old man sighs with the exhaustion of someone watching civilization decline in real time. Somewhere nearby, apprentices gamble with carved bone dice while pretending not to notice the guildmasters glaring at them. A servant girl hangs wet gloves near the hearth to dry. Candles flicker across rows of polished leather goods lining the walls like trophies. The brown dog wanders calmly into the hall midway through supper. No one knows how he got inside. A guild member points suspiciously. "That beast stole my lunch yesterday." The dog immediately sits beside another craftsman and looks morally innocent. It almost works. As night settles over the borough, you remain near the fire, listening to guild members speak about leather the way poets speak about language or sailors speak about weather. With pride, frustration, possessiveness. Love. Outside, frost gathers slowly along the windows while bells ring the late evening hour across the sleeping town. And inside the warm guild hall, beneath hanging gloves and polished boots, humanity's old survival material has become something entirely more ambitious. Not merely protection from winter anymore, but craftsmanship shaped carefully into status, identity, rivalry, and beauty. The guild hall finally quiets sometime after midnight, though the silence arrives reluctantly. Long after the candles burn low, you still hear fragments of conversation drifting through the rafters, arguments about stitching, muttered complaints about taxes, one craftsman insisting loudly that pointed shoes will be the ruin of sensible ankles. Outside, frost thickens across the borough streets. The windows cloud faintly with ice while the wind prowls softly along the walls. You sleep near the dying hearth beneath a borrowed wool blanket smelling pleasantly of smoke and saddle oil. Nearby, apprentices snore in uneven chorus, while the brown dog curls beneath a table after successfully stealing half a sausage from someone important enough to remain furious about it. Morning comes sharp and bright. For the first time in days, the sky clears fully. Cold sunlight spills across the guild hall windows and turns the frost silver along the beams. Bells ring the early hour while smoke rises straight upward into the pale winter air. Today the guildmasters travel to a nearby manor feast. And somehow, through a chain of decisions nobody fully explains, you go with them. The road north crunches beneath frozen mud and thin snow. Horses snort steam into the cold while carts creak slowly uphill toward the estate. Guild members wrap themselves in heavy cloaks lined with fox, rabbit, and sheepskin against the bitter wind. One older leatherworker pats his fur collar proudly. Good fox trim, he says, 10 winters old. Another glances sideways. Still uglier than my wife's curtains. The man considers this. Fair. The countryside lies quiet beneath frost. Bare trees stretch dark branches against the bright sky while frozen fields glitter faintly under morning light. Smoke rises from distant cottages where peasants already labour despite the cold. Everything feels still, held, as though winter itself pauses briefly to catch breath. The manor appears near midday atop a low hill beyond a cluster of frozen orchards. Stone walls surround the estate. Banners hang stiff in the cold wind. Servants hurry across the courtyard carrying baskets, firewood, and casks of ale while dogs bark excitedly near the stables. You step through the gates into a world warmer, brighter, and softer than most of the road behind you. The great hall glows with firelight. Rushes cover the stone floor beneath long wooden tables already crowded with trenchers, candles, silver cups, and evergreen branches tied along the rafters for winter decoration. Smoke curls lazily toward the high ceiling blackened by centuries of feasts. And everywhere you see fur and leather. Not practical alone now. Ceremonial. Displayed. Admired. Noble women wear squirrel-lined sleeves spilling softly across embroidered gowns. Men fasten polished leather belts with silver buckles broad enough to announce both wealth and mild back pain. Fur mantles drape over benches like sleeping animals. One lord arrives in riding boots so finely polished they reflect the candle flames. Another wears gloves dyed deep burgundy trimmed in pale ermine. Fashion has fully entered the hall now. Not hidden anymore. Celebrated openly beside roasted meats and music. A servant removes your damp cloak while another offers warmed spiced wine. Heat rushes pleasantly into your frozen hands. Near the hearth, musicians tune strings while guests gather in clusters trading gossip about marriages, trade agreements, hunting rights, and entirely unnecessary sleeve lengths. You overhear one noble woman whisper, "She wore fox trim at Candlemas." A pause follows. How brave. The tone suggests something between admiration and scandal. You begin realizing how clothing speaks silently in medieval noble circles. Fur type, leather softness, imported dyes, decorative stitching. Every detail quietly announces rank, taste, wealth, ambition. And people notice. Oh, they absolutely notice. At the high table, servants arrange platters of roasted boar beside loaves of dark bread, smoked fish, honeyed pears, and steaming pottage fragrant with herbs. The smell fills the hall richly while beeswax candles flicker across polished goblets. A young steward wearing rabbit-lined gloves passes carrying folded cloaks toward a warming rack beside the fire. He handles each garment carefully, almost reverently. Some of these cloaks likely cost more than farmland. The guildmasters move proudly through the gathering, displaying their work with quiet satisfaction. Fine belts, fur cuffs, riding gloves, decorative saddles stitched with coloured thread. One nobleman lifts a leather riding glove appreciatively. Soft work. The craftsman nods. Calfskin treated 3 times with oil and smoke. The nobleman smiles faintly. Luxury for winter roads. That phrase settles in your mind. Luxury for winter roads. Humanity began with rough hides wrapped against freezing wind. Yet now, centuries later, people seek elegance even while crossing mud and frost. Perhaps comfort naturally invites beauty once survival becomes slightly less desperate. As evening deepens, the feast truly begins. Musicians play near the hearth while servants move endlessly through the hall balancing trenchers and ale pitchers. Candles glow golden against fur-lined sleeves and polished leather boots. Laughter rises warmly toward the rafters. You sit among guild members near the middle tables while conversation drifts lazily around you. A merchant boasts about imported gloves from southern traders. A hunter swears wolf pelts remain superior for harsh winters. An abbey steward quietly insists monks produce the finest parchment leather in the kingdom. No offence, he adds toward the guildmasters. Some taken, one replies immediately. The feast rolls onward through music, warmth, and steady drinking. Yet beneath all the luxury, traces of the older world remain visible. The fur still comes from hunted forests, the leather from scraped hides beside bitter rivers, the gloves from cold workshops lit by candles and aching hands. Nobles wear elegance, but craftsmen and hunters still build it piece by piece. Late in the evening, a storyteller rises beside the hearth carrying a fox pelt draped across one shoulder. Some swear he begins dramatically that fox fur grants wit to the wearer. Several nobles glance around the room suspiciously. The storyteller smiles. Though after tonight's wine, I fear we may test the theory poorly. Soft laughter moves through the hall. Outside, snow begins drifting gently beyond the windows. Inside, warmth thickens around the feast, while servants replenish candles and firewood. The brown dog somehow appears beneath the high table, chewing contentedly on what seems to be an entire pheasant leg. No one interrupts him. Frankly, by now he belongs here as much as anyone. Near midnight the music softens. Guests settle deeper into fur-lined cloaks while embers glow red along the hearthstones. The hall grows quieter, gentler, and you sit beneath the warm candlelight watching noble hands rest inside beautifully crafted leather gloves, realizing how completely animal skins have transformed across the medieval world. From rough protection against winter cold into symbols of taste, wealth, identity, and quiet human longing for beauty beside the firelight. By the time the feast finally fades into silence, snow has buried the manor courtyard beneath a smooth white blanket. Moonlight spills pale across the walls and frozen orchards while the last exhausted servants carry empty trenchers toward the kitchens. Inside the great hall, embers glow softly beneath drifting smoke. Guests sleep where they surrendered to warmth and ale, noblemen slumped beneath fur mantles, musicians curled beside benches, one guild master snoring gently into an untouched pear tart. The brown dog sleeps directly upon a discarded velvet cushion near the hearth. An astonishing rise in social rank. Morning arrives cold and brilliantly still. You wake beneath a wool blanket while pale winter sunlight spills through narrow windows onto the rush-strewn floor. Frost feathers the corners of the hall. Somewhere distant, axes strike frozen wood in steady rhythm. Outside, the estate breathes quietly beneath snow. Stable boys shovel paths through the courtyard while smoke rises from chimneys into the crystal-clear sky. The air smells sharp and clean now, pine smoke, horse breath, cold iron, distant baking bread. A servant hands you warm oat cakes wrapped in cloth before pointing toward the lower storehouses beside the orchard wall. The mistress wants inventory counted before more snow comes. This apparently includes everyone within walking distance. You follow two servants downhill across the frozen yard toward a long stone building half buried beneath snowdrifts. Thick oak doors grown open beneath iron hinges, releasing a dense wave of smells into the cold air. Leather, smoke, dried herbs, lanolin, stored wool. Winter itself seems packed inside. The storehouse glows dimly beneath hanging lanterns. Rows of shelves stretch into shadow carrying folded cloaks, bundled furs, riding tack, boots, gloves, harness straps, blankets, sacks of salt, and carefully wrapped winter garments awaiting the harsher months ahead. This is survival arranged neatly by candlelight. The steward overseeing the inventory moves slowly between shelves with a wax tablet in hand. He wears thick sheepskin gloves missing 2 fingertips for easier counting. Mind the moth chests, he warns, and don't step on the traps. You immediately begin looking for traps. Winter storehouses reveal truths feasts try to soften. Everything here exists because cold remains dangerous. No amount of noble elegance changes that. Fox-lined cloaks protect wealthy shoulders. Yes, but also preserve body heat. Leather boots survive frozen roads. Fur blankets prevent illness during bitter nights when winds creep beneath shutters and stone walls radiate cold like wells. The medieval world never fully escapes winter. It merely negotiates with it. You move through the storehouse, helping sort garments according to use and value. Heavy wolfskin cloaks for hunting parties, rabbit-lined mittens for children, sheepskin blankets for servants' quarters, thick leather riding coats darkened by oil against snow and rain. Each object carries the memory of labour behind it. Hunters crossing frost-bound forests, women scraping hides beside smoky fires, cobblers stitching by candlelight, guild craftsmen arguing over seams and dyes. The entire journey follows you into this room. A young servant carefully shakes dried lavender into folded fur cloaks before sealing them inside cedar chests. For moths, she explains, then lowers her voice slightly. And spirits. You ask which spirits. She shrugs. The sort that ruin expensive things. Reasonable enough. Some swear fox fur stored with rosemary lasts longer through damp winters. Others insist rabbit pelts absorb illness if left too near sick beds. One old servant claims leather cracks less during harsh weather if rubbed with goose fat beneath a waxing moon. No one fully believes these customs, yet no one abandons them either. By midday, the steward opens a rear chamber where finer goods are kept away from moisture and theft. The air inside feels warmer somehow, thick with cedar smoke and expensive oils. Here the noble household stores its prized winter garments. Ermine collars wrapped in linen, dyed calfskin gloves, soft squirrel-lined riding cloaks, imported leather belts embossed with tiny silver patterns. Fashion sleeps quietly in cedar chests while snow gathers outside. You pause beside a magnificent travelling mantle lined entirely in deep red fox fur. The leather clasps shine softly in the lantern light. "Southern work," the steward says proudly. "Gift from a wine merchant." He runs gloved fingers across the stitching. Too fine for ordinary roads. Yet even this elegant garment exists for warmth first. That realization continues returning throughout your journey. Beneath all the status and display, animal skins remain deeply practical things. Medieval beauty rarely drifts far from necessity. A stable hand enters carrying damaged tack from the courtyard. Snowmelt drips from cracked leather reins while he curses softly about frozen buckles and stubborn horses. The steward sighs heavily. Nothing survives winter forever. That sentence settles through the dim storehouse like dust. Nothing survives winter forever. Not boots. Not gloves, not cloaks, not even kingdoms, perhaps. And yet people keep stitching, repairing, oiling, preserving. They keep trying. The afternoon passes slowly among shelves and cedar chests, while snow falls steadily beyond the narrow windows. Lantern light flickers softly across hanging harness straps and rows of folded blankets. Somewhere overhead, faint music drifts from the manor hall where musicians practice near the hearth. You discover a box filled entirely with old gloves too worn for formal use but too valuable to discard. Patched fingertips, restitched seams, fur cuffs gone thin from years of wear. Human hands leave themselves behind in leather more clearly than almost anywhere else. The brown dog eventually wanders into the storehouse, dragging what appears to be an entire rabbit pelt stolen from somewhere profoundly inappropriate. The steward closes his eyes in visible despair. "That creature," he mutters, "will one day rob a bishop." The dog seems open to future opportunities. Toward evening, the inventory finally ends. Servants close cedar chests carefully while lanterns glow warmer against the gathering dark. Snow thickens outside, muffling the estate beneath soft white silence. You linger one last moment inside the storehouse doorway. Around you hangs the quiet accumulation of generations learning how to survive winter with grace where possible, stubbornness where necessary. Animal skins folded into blankets, leather stitched into boots, fur sewn into cloaks, all preserved carefully against cold nights still waiting beyond the walls. And as the doors close behind you and snow whispers across the frozen courtyard, you understand how deeply these materials shaped medieval life not merely as fashion or trade, but as humanity's patient defense against hunger, weather, darkness, and the endless turning of winter seasons. Snow continues through the night, softening the world into silence so complete that even the manor bells sound muffled beneath it. By dawn, the roads beyond the estate lie buried under fresh white drifts, and the stable yard has become a battlefield between servants and frozen water buckets. You wake to the smell of smoke and fresh bread drifting faintly through the hall. Frost blooms across the windows like pale ferns while sleepy servants shuffle past carrying firewood wrapped in cloaks. Outside, the air bites sharply at your face. Winter has settled properly now. The steward announces after breakfast that several merchant wagons must still leave before the roads worsen completely. Supplies cannot wait for better weather. Trade rarely can. So once more you find yourself travelling. The caravan gathers near the outer gate, two broad wagons creaking beneath canvas covers, pack horses stamped impatiently in the snow, merchants wrapped in thick fur-lined cloaks while servants tighten leather straps with stiff red fingers. The road ahead looks miserable. Naturally, everyone proceeds anyway. You join the procession moving slowly southward through the frozen countryside. Wagon wheels crunch across snow-packed ruts while bells tied to the harnesses ring softly in the cold air. Breath rises from horses and travellers alike in pale, drifting clouds. Trade roads in winter possess a particular kind of endurance. Not bravery exactly, more stubbornness. The merchants carry everything the season demands: cured hides, dyed leather rolls, rabbit pelts, fox fur bundles, finished gloves wrapped in oilcloth, belts, boots, saddle straps, waxed cloaks, and little luxury goods destined for wealthier towns farther south. Animal skins travel endlessly now, from forest to tannery, from workshop to guildhall, from noble feast to frozen roadside inn. The whole medieval world seems stitched together by muddy roads and leather straps. One merchant riding beside the lead wagon adjusts his heavy gloves thoughtfully. Road tolls increased again near the eastern bridge. He grumbles. Another snorts into his scarf. Bridges always become more expensive after rain. This apparently qualifies as economic wisdom. The road winds through low hills scattered with bare winter trees. Snow gathers thick along stone walls and frozen hedges. Occasionally you pass isolated cottages where smoke rises quietly from chimneys, while children stare wide-eyed at the caravan from doorways. The merchants keep moving steadily despite the cold. Leather covers protect the cargo from snow. Fur-lined boots crunch through ice. Thick gloves grip reins stiffened by frost. Everything depends upon preparation here. Untreated leather cracks. Wet straps freeze. Poorly wrapped goods rot. Winter punishes carelessness with frightening efficiency. By midday, the caravan reaches a toll gate guarding a narrow bridge over a half-frozen river. The gatehouse crouches beside the crossing like a suspicious old crow wrapped in stone. Two guards emerge wearing heavy sheepskin cloaks and expressions suggesting they trust no one born after sunrise. "Toll for wagons," one announces. The merchants groan collectively. Coins change hands with visible emotional pain while the guards inspect the cargo. One pokes suspiciously at a bundle of fox pelts. "Expensive?" "Not after taxes," the merchant replies darkly. The guard almost smiles. Almost. Beyond the bridge, the road deteriorates quickly into deep slush where snowmelt gathers beneath wagon wheels. Progress slows. Horses strain against the mud while drivers shout encouragement that sounds suspiciously like threats. You walk beside the second wagon for warmth, close enough to smell the cargo beneath the canvas-tanned leather, wool wrappings, cedar oil, faint traces of smoke trapped inside the goods themselves. The merchant nearest you pats one bundled crate proudly. Gloves for the bishop's household. Another crate contains dyed riding boots bound for a noble estate farther south. A third holds trimmed fur collars wrapped carefully against moisture. Fashion rides these muddy roads quietly alongside necessity. No grand announcement accompanies it. Just wagons creaking through snow while merchants calculate profit beside freezing rivers. Toward afternoon the weather turns again. Wind sweeps across the hills carrying sharp bursts of sleet that rattle against the wagons and sting exposed skin. Travellers pull cloaks tighter. Horses lower their heads stubbornly into the storm. A servant beside you mutters a prayer while touching a leather charm hanging beneath his sleeve. For luck, you ask. For wheel axles, he replies. Honestly, medieval priorities remain refreshingly practical. The caravan shelters briefly beneath a stand of pine trees while drivers inspect straps and harness buckles. One leather binding has begun stiffening dangerously from ice. A merchant kneels immediately beside it, rubbing oil into the frozen leather with bare fingers despite the cold. Lose a harness out here, he says, and the road keeps your cargo forever. That feels true in more ways than one. Some swear traders once vanished entirely along winter roads, swallowed by storms or bandits or frozen marshland beneath the snow. Others insist certain crossroads carry curses older than the kingdom itself. No one can quite agree. Yet every merchant travelling these routes wears charms somewhere hidden beneath their clothing. Just in case. By dusk, the caravan finally reaches a roadside posting inn built against the shelter of a wooded hillside. Lanterns glow warmly through the snow, while stable boys rush forward to help with the horses. The travellers stumble gratefully inside. Warmth crashes over you again in waves of smoke, stew, wet wool, and crowded humanity. Leather gloves steam beside the hearth. Fur cloaks drip melted snow onto the rush-covered floor. Someone immediately orders ale with the desperate sincerity of a pilgrim finding salvation. The merchants gather around long tables discussing roads and prices, while servants unpack portions of the cargo for inspection. Candlelight gleams across polished boots, and carefully wrapped leather goods spread beside the fire. Even here, halfway between towns during a winter storm, a trade continues. A noblewoman's gloves must still arrive. A bishop still expects new riding boots. A guild still waits for fox pelts before Candlemas. The medieval world moves slowly, but it does move. Late in the evening, one merchant unwraps a deep green leather riding glove trimmed in rabbit fur. The firelight catches softly across the stitching. "Look at that work," someone murmurs. And everyone does. Because somewhere along these frozen roads, between muddy toll gates and storm-soaked wagons, animal skins stopped being merely protection from cold, and became objects people admired simply for being beautiful. Outside, sleet rattles against the shutters while horses shift heavily in the stables below the hill. Inside, leather goods dry beside the hearth among tired travellers and drifting smoke. And the long road carries onward through winter darkness, one stitched glove and creaking wagon at a time. The storm weakens sometime before dawn, leaving the posting inn wrapped in heavy silence beneath fresh snow. Wind still brushes the shutters occasionally, but the furious sleet has passed. In the stable yard below, horses stamp and snort clouds of steam into the freezing morning air, while stable boys curse quietly at frozen buckets. You wake beside the hearth, where the embers still glow faintly red beneath ash. Around you, merchants sleep tangled in cloaks and blankets, boots lined neatly beside the fire to dry. The smell of leather hangs warmly through the room, gloves, harness straps, saddlebags, wet boots softening overnight near the heat. The brown dog sleeps beneath the merchant's table with his paws wrapped protectively around an entire sausage link. At this point, honestly, he may own more property than several peasants. Outside, the world gleams white and painfully bright beneath the rising sun. Snow crunches sharply underfoot as the caravan prepares once more for the road. Leather straps creak in the cold. Drivers warm stiff fingers over lantern flames before tightening harness buckles. One merchant examines a pair of riding gloves while muttering darkly. Cracked at the thumb. Another shrugs. Everything cracks eventually. Not the most inspiring philosophy, perhaps, but deeply medieval. The road today descends gradually toward a larger town where the merchants intend to finish their journey before the next storm arrives. Snow blankets the countryside in smooth rolling silence. Bare hedgerows carve dark lines across the fields, while crows gather along fence posts watching the caravan pass. The wagons move more slowly now through packed snow. Wheels groan, horses labour steadily. Yet beneath the difficulty lies a strange calm. Winter roads demand patience from everyone. You walk beside the lead wagon carrying crates of gloves and riding gear wrapped carefully beneath treated leather covers. Every so often the merchants stop to inspect the bindings or brush snow from the cargo. Moisture ruins stitching, one reminds the younger drivers. Cold stiffens leather. Another nods, but too much fire dries it. Everything requires balance here. Too wet, it rots. Too dry, it cracks. Too cold, it stiffens. Too much heat, it warps. The entire craft of leatherwork feels strangely similar to caring for human lives. Toward midday, the caravan reaches the outskirts of the town at last. Smoke rises thickly above the walls while bells ring faintly through the cold air. The gates stand crowded with traders, farmers, monks, and carts arriving before weather closes the roads again. Inside, the streets churn with winter activity despite the cold. Snowmelt turns the lower lanes into grey slush. Market stalls huddle beneath heavy awnings. Candles flicker behind shop windows glowing warmly against the pale afternoon. The merchants split apart quickly once inside the walls, each carrying goods toward workshops, guild contacts, or wealthy customers waiting impatiently for winter deliveries. You follow one leather trader through twisting streets toward a tailor's shop near the cloth market. The workshop sits between a wool merchant and a candle maker, its narrow windows fogged with warmth. Above the doorway hangs a painted sign showing a silver needle crossing a foxtail. Inside, the air feels soft with heat and fabric dust. Candles glow along the walls beside hanging cloaks, riding coats, fur-lined sleeves, belts, gloves, and folded cloth imported from distant towns. Threads of every colour spill across the work tables, while apprentices hurry between benches carrying pins in their mouths and armfuls of unfinished garments. And here, perhaps more clearly than anywhere before, survival finally becomes fashion completely. A tailor bends over a leather riding coat beneath the window, stitching fur lining carefully into the collar with tiny precise movements. Nearby, a noblewoman stands upon a wooden platform while two assistants adjust the sleeves of her winter mantle. "Less bulk at the shoulders," she says. "You requested extra fur," the tailor replies gently. "Yes, but graceful fur. A challenging concept, apparently." The workshop master notices you observing the work and gestures proudly toward a finished cloak hanging near the hearth. Soft dark wool, fox fur lining, dyed leather clasps shaped like curling vines. The garment looks warm enough to survive a blizzard and elegant enough to inspire envy at supper. That one travels tomorrow to a magistrate's wife, the tailor says. His fingers smooth the sleeve carefully. People expect beauty now. There it is again. That slow transformation. Animal skins once wrapped around shivering bodies beside primitive fires. But centuries of labour, trade, craft, and ambition have changed them into symbols people desire not merely for warmth, but for identity itself. The apprentices move constantly through the workshop. One trims rabbit fur into neat strips. Another softens dyed leather with oil beside the hearth. A third carefully embroiders cuffs onto gloves destined for wealthy customers. The room smells wonderful. Warm cloth, smoke, beeswax, leather oil, faint traces of cedar from storage chests, human effort stitched quietly into every corner. You sit beside the fire while the tailor works steadily through the afternoon. Outside, snow drifts softly past the windows while bells mark the passing hours across the crowded town. The tailor speaks without looking up. My grandfather made shepherd boots. His needle flashes silver in the candlelight. My father made riding gloves. He tightens another stitch. And now noble women ask me whether squirrel fur appears too provincial for winter gatherings. He smiles faintly. No one can quite agree. A servant girl nearby laughs softly. Lady Agnes claims squirrel fur makes a woman look scholarly. Lady Agnes, another apprentice mutters, also believes vinegar cures baldness. The tailor sighs. Fashion spreads faster than wisdom. Still, you can hear pride beneath his exhaustion. Because the work matters now in ways beyond survival alone. Late afternoon settles gently over the shop. Candles burn brighter as daylight fades blue beyond the windows. Finished garments hang quietly from wooden forms around the room: cloaks, gloves, riding coats, fur cuffs, polished belts. Each piece carries echoes of every place you have visited. The hunter's frozen forest, the tannery pits beside the river, the monastery scriptorium, the muddy pilgrim road, the Guildhall arguments, the winter storehouse, the merchant wagons crossing storm-bound hills. All of it gathers here at the tailor's final careful stitch. The brown dog wanders into the shop just before dusk, dragging a strip of rabbit fur stolen from somewhere deeply unfortunate. The apprentices laugh immediately. The tailor points sternly. That creature, he declares, has stronger trade connections than half this town. No one disagrees. Outside, evening snow softens the streets into quiet white shadows while lanterns glow warmly across the market quarter. And inside the tailor's workshop, beneath candlelight and drifting smoke, humanity's oldest winter protection has fully become something more delicate, ambitious, and strangely tender. Not simply armour against the cold anymore, but a way people choose to present themselves to the world and to one another. Night settles gently over the town while snow continues falling in slow, quiet spirals beyond the tailor's windows. Lanterns glow along the market streets below, their reflections trembling softly across slush and frozen puddles. Somewhere distant, monastery bells drift through the darkened air, low and patient as breathing. Inside the workshop, the apprentices finish their final stitches beneath beeswax candles burned nearly to the base. Fur-lined gloves rest beside folded cloaks awaiting delivery in the morning. Threads lie scattered across the tables like tiny strands of faded gold. The tailor trims one last loose stitch from a riding mantle and finally leans back with a tired sigh. There, he murmurs softly, warmth pretending to be elegance. No one corrects him, because perhaps elegance has always been warmth carefully arranged against the cold. You remain beside the hearth while the workshop slowly empties around you. Apprentices gather scraps into baskets. Candles are snuffed one by one. Outside, footsteps soften beneath fresh snow until even the busy market quarter begins fading towards silence. The brown dog sleeps beneath the cutting table wrapped absurdly in stolen rabbit fur. Somehow, after all these roads and storms and crowded halls, his life appears to have improved steadily. The tailor drapes blankets over finished garments before retiring upstairs, leaving only the firelight glowing dimly through the room. You sit quietly in the warmth listening to snowbrush against the shutters, and slowly, the long journey begins settling inside your thoughts. You remember the first tannery beside the river where rawhides hung dripping in the winter rain, the sharp smell of bark vats and smoke, the hunters dragging frozen deer skins through muddy gates at dawn, apprentices scraping hides with numb red fingers while bells echoed across the cold water. You remember the monastery where calfskin parchment carried prayers and memory beneath candlelight, the soft scratch of quills across prepared hide, the monk saying God writes on curious material. You remember muddy market squares shimmering with rain where merchants argued over gloves and fox trim beneath dripping awnings, pilgrims warming fur-lined boots beside roadside fires, guild craftsmen protecting stitching secrets as fiercely as kings guard borders. And you remember the noble hall glowing gold with firelight, while fur collars brushed embroidered sleeves and leather gloves rested around silver cups. Everywhere, through every frozen lane and smoky room, animal skins followed quietly beside human life. At first they were only survival, simple protection against weather harsh enough to kill. But people are rarely satisfied with mere survival for long. Somewhere across countless winters, someone softened the leather more carefully than necessary. Someone added stitching where plain binding would do. Someone lined a cloak with finer fur not because they must, but because beauty itself offered comfort. And slowly, almost invisibly, necessity became fashion. Not all at once, not through great declarations, through small human desires repeated across generations. A softer glove, a warmer lining, a richer dye, a more graceful sleeve. Civilization often changes exactly this way quietly, patiently, beside ordinary hearths while nobody notices history happening. The fire settles lower. Outside, snow blankets the roofs and roads and market stalls until the entire town seems gentler somehow beneath the winter night. Horses sleep in warm stables wrapped in leather tack rubbed soft by years of use. Fur cloaks hang drying beside hearths. Boots rest near embers awaiting tomorrow's muddy streets. And everywhere people sleep beneath blankets, cloaks, gloves, belts, and garments shaped from the old ancient partnership between humanity and the animals that once shared these forests and hills. Even now, centuries later, it is hard to separate necessity from beauty entirely. Perhaps they were never truly separate. The medieval world understood something modern people sometimes forget during easier winters and brighter nights. Comfort matters deeply. Warmth matters deeply. The feeling of soft fur against cold hands after a long road through snow matters more than pride allows most people to admit. The bells sound again somewhere beyond the rooftops. Slow, distant, almost dreamlike now. You imagine the hunters asleep near dying fires at the forest edge, the cobbler resting aching hands beside his bench, the guildmasters snoring beneath heavy blankets while apprentices whisper about future fashions, pilgrims trudging onward beneath stars with leather satchels against their shoulders, all connected by these quiet materials: hide, fur, thread, smoke, patience, human hands working slowly against winter darkness. The firelight grows softer still. The room dims around you until only outlines remain: folded cloaks, hanging gloves, candle stubs melting beside the work tables, the little rise and fall of the sleeping dog beneath his stolen fur. Outside, snow continues falling over roads that will someday vanish beneath stone and sentries, over markets long gone silent, over workshops whose fires burned out ages ago. Yet for this moment, the medieval night still breathes gently around you. Warm leather drying beside hearthstones, soft fur collars catching candlelight, the distant ringing of bells through cold mist. And somewhere deep inside that quiet world, humanity learning slowly that survival alone is not enough, that even during harsh winters, people still long for beauty, softness, warmth, and small comforts carefully made by hand. The embers settle lower. The shadows soften. The bells fade farther into the snowy dark. And at last the long roads, the crowded halls, the muddy markets, and the frozen forests drift gently into silence beside the fire, leaving only warmth, dim candlelight, and the slow, peaceful hush of winter carrying you softly towards sleep.